Hi, I'm Russell, the official watchdog of the Sofa Dogs podcast. Speaking of, welcome to the new show, The Watchdog. For the first ever episode ever, we'll revisit the short-lived, canceled Fox series, as if there was one, Joss Whedon's Firefly. The story goes like this. After his successful career as a crime-fighting novelist, Richard Castle is kidnapped by Rossum, gets his mind wiped, and reprogrammed by Printy the Chair. Then, he's cryogenically frozen, and emerges 500 years in the future as Han Solo. No! I mean, Malcolm Reynolds. Or Mal, for short.
Mal. Bad. In the Latin.
Oh. Huh. I guess in the future, the dead language is a zombie. So anyway, when we meet Bad Reynolds, he's in the middle of a civil war, fighting for freedom of the common individual against mass corporate conformity known as the Alliance. At first, he's totally crushing it. He's running around, barking orders, blowing stuff up, kissing his crucifix. It's awesome sauce. Suddenly, his team is outmatched, so he calls in for some air support. Instead of helping him, the higher-ups decide it's so not worth it, so they take off. Because he didn't get his way, Mal tells God to suck it, and becomes the captain of a freelance smuggling and transport ship called Serenity. His crew is a ragtag group of colorful characters from different walks of life. There's Mal's second-in-command, Zoe, who actually served alongside him in much the same way during the war. She's a tough, no-nonsense warrior woman. To balance that out, she's married to the ship's pilot, Wash, a wise-cracking, fun-loving goofball. Although Joss Whedon is an atheist, Bible-thumping is still alive and kicking centuries from now. Enter Shepherd Book, a half-Buddhist, half-Christian preacher. This world has a rather progressive, forward-thinking view of prostitution. Not only is it legal, it's considered a highly respected, almost royalty-based occupation. This introduces us to Inara, otherwise known as Mal's unrequited love interest. For all intents and purposes, she's basically a princess or queen in this context. Remind you of anyone? There's also a big, dumb, lovable id character named Jane, who's also a gun nut. If he's a representation of the show's violent, selfish, impulsive side, Kaylee, the ship's mechanic, is all about peace, love, selflessness, and friendship. She's like a human hug with boobs. I'm a dog. During the first episode, a passenger aboard Serenity reveals himself to be a doctor turned fugitive, wanted by the Alliance for breaking his little sister out of a government facility, where she was secretly being experimented on. When a space cop comes to arrest Dr. Simon Tam, Mal discovers Girl in a Box River Tam tucked away with the luggage. Simon explains how the Alliance messed with his sister's brain and made her crazy. Their story plays into Mal's extreme hatred of the Alliance, so he decides to harbor the fugitive siblings. Also, he needs a doctor aboard his ship, so that helps. The second episode of Firefly, called The Train Job, gets unfairly dismissed by fans of the show for extraneous reasons that have very little to do with the material itself. Originally, when Fox picked up the series, they weren't crazy about some elements within the pilot, and didn't want this to be the audience's introduction to the show, and so The Train Job was born. It's much shorter than the pilot, which means less of an initial commitment from the audience and their time, and it uses more concise methods with a visual shorthand to introduce and establish the characters and what the show is all about. For example, our heroes get into a good old-fashioned bar fight, and when one of them is tossed through a window, not only does it turn out to be a holographic plate, but once he's outside, the other planets visible in the skyline indicate they're not even on Earth. One of the other defining moments happens later in this episode as well. After refusing to follow through on a heist Mal was hired to do once he realized he would be taking medicine from a town of sick people, he gives back the money he was paid and asks a thug to take it to their employer with his sincerest apology, telling him to find someone else. When the thug won't take no for an answer and threatens him, Mal kicks the guy into a giant jet engine. People who turn their nose up at this episode also point to this very moment as one of their favorites in the entire series. To me, after those first 10 minutes of recapping what most of us already know from the pilot, this episode stands on its own and works as a solid entry in hooking people into watching more. A really fascinating aspect of Firefly is how you can fit certain episodes into 3 specific genres, all to varying degrees: the war film, the heist film, and the western film. The train job, Ariel, and Trash fall comfortably into the crime/caper formula. Shindig, Safe, and Heart of Gold draw inspiration from tropes of the Old West, while Serenity, War Stories, and The Message deals heavily in military elements and the effects of wartime. Give me all your cashy money, or I'll blast you into cancellation. There are exceptions to this. For example, Bushwhacked shares the same premise as the film Event Horizon. Both are about the main characters responding to a distress beacon in space, exploring a derelict spaceship, and finding all kinds of dark and disturbing things. Actually, that would be a really fun double bill to watch alone. At night. Yeah. Our Mrs. Reynolds harkens back to the great screwball comedies from the 1940s, reminiscent of Howard Hawks and Preston Sturges. Janestown is a fun romp of an episode that does have a button of dramatic irony and subversion of expectation by the end that Joss Whedon is famous for. My absolute favorite episode of Firefly, however, is Out of Gas, written by Tim Minear. It opens with Mal alone on Serenity and slowly bleeding to death as he's been shot. As the story unfolds, not only do we get flashbacks to how he ended up in this situation, but the episode goes even further back to show how Mal obtained his ship and his crew in the first place. It's haunting, funny, suspenseful, and moving, and to me, fully crystallizes the beauty of the entire series in roughly 42 minutes. Objects in Space is probably the most abstract, fascinating, and thought-provoking episode. A good portion of it lets us inside River Tam's mind, while also being one of the finest examples of a bottle episode I've ever seen. For those who don't know, a bottle episode refers to a ship in a bottle, meaning as a conservation of money and production value, an episode of a series will be localized and self-contained to a pre-existing set and will feature few to no guest stars. In this case, we're introduced to a bounty hunter who has incapacitated most of Serenity's crew in search of elusive fugitive River Tam. Revisiting Joss Whedon's Firefly a decade later, I'm reminded of how fresh and ahead of its time the show truly was. I feel that only now are some of the ideas, tones, and concepts of the show finally catching up to the way good television is being made today. Firefly combined our past with a rich and fully realized future to comment on our present. Technology of the future plays such an intrinsic part in observing and sometimes solving past problems that we still struggle with today. Firefly, the complete series, is available on DVD and Blu-ray from 20th Century Fox Home Entertainment. Well, that's the first episode of The Watchdog, hosted by me, Russell, the Watchdog. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have something in both my eyes. Also, I'm allergic to things that make me sad. Bye!